Okay, this hour we'll take your phone calls with Andrew Basiago right here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. We'll take your phone calls with Andrew. Andrew, you were talking about Bill Clinton, and your father hit it right on the head, didn't he?
He certainly did. In fact, he mentioned it again. We were camping at Mount Shasta in the late 70s, and he asked my brother and I what the future would hold. And I think I said that that flying car featured in Star Wars would become dominant by the time I was an adult. And he said, well, boys, I can tell you this. One of our next future presidents is going to be Bill Clinton. And I really wasn't thinking about my project experiences as a youngster, even there in my late teens or mid-teens. And we found that statement so funny that we actually fell off the picnic table bench laughing at his statement that somebody named Bill Clinton was going to be president. But that, in fact, was sort of the strange culture we were living in there when I was, sort of having these parallel experiences. I had a very wonderful and happy childhood growing up in New Jersey, but I had essentially been involved in, the cult of intelligence at a very young age. And I think I repressed a lot of it. And so even by my mid or late teens, I was already not really connecting that kind of statement back to things I had heard when I was on the project as a 7, 8, 9-year-old. But I also I'd like to add also that I mentioned President Obama. That's a little bit stranger, and I think may even indicate that the hand of the Almighty in some way has been involved in furthering my truth campaign. I mentioned President Obama. Now, the strange thing about that is I met President Obama when I was an undergraduate at UCLA. I don't have the precise date, but we know it was either the spring or summer break of 1982, because I had interviewed Buckminster Fuller in the fall of 81, and my meeting with the young Barack Obama occurred before he graduated from Columbia in summer of 83. I was having a discussion with a South African anti-apartheid activist on Bruin Walk, and I was sharing with him some of my thoughts in political economy, particularly the direction that the transnational corporations would be taking over the next several decades. And he said, listen, I have a house guest I'd like to introduce you to. I think he'd be fascinated by what you have to say about what Bucky Fuller shared with you and some of your ideas in political economy. And so I went with this individual over to his house in West Los Angeles, and I had a discussion that lasted about a half hour with a young student who was back in Los Angeles after having spent a year at Columbia. And he explained to me that his name was Barack Obama and that he was in L.A. Visiting his friends from his 2 years at Occidental College in Eagle Rock, California. Mm-hmm. And our discussion about the corporations, I was taking a much more radical take on where the corporations were going, the possibility that they might enslave humanity, destroy the environment. Barack Obama was taking a much more sort of liberal position that they were necessary institutions in society, a much more lawyerly analysis. And so our conversation unraveled essentially into an argument. And our host said to me, you better be nice to him, Andy, because he's going to be president of the United States someday. So the incredibly serendipitous thing is that as somebody, I'm sure that neither of them at the time understood that ultimately I would be able to make sense of that comment, because I, in fact, had previously in my life been one of the children attached to the very classified defense-related research and development program where quantum access technologies were developed that would allow the U.S. government to identify a particular person of interest like a future president and literally approach them and brief them. But clearly, now Barack Obama was born in August of 61, myself in September of 61. We're literal contemporaries. And that meeting with President Obama occurred when we were 20 years old. So in the case of President Obama, he had 27 years to prepare psychologically for the presidency. I presume he must have been briefed by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was his mentor at Columbia. Zbigniew Brzezinski had just served as national security advisor for President Carter.
He sure was.
And
surely a globalist, Andy.
Yes, and I know I can date it to that time frame, so that indicates that after spending a year at Columbia, by that time, a young Barack Obama had already been approached by our government and at least informed about his destiny. In a similar way, I was informed of my destiny as somebody who would be principally associated in society with the discovery of life on Mars, not simply because I was told that when I was a child attached to Project Pegasus, but I was shown and asked to read my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, that I published last year in 1971. I was shown the 2008 version and required to read it. And when I asked, well, why do I have to read this paper that I'm going to write, 37 years from now, they said, so that when you do write it, it contains as much data about Mars as possible. So I think the significance of these experiences is that there was some attempt that was being made to take information from the future and use it in the present to channel certain outcomes that they either thought were beneficial for the country or that would help the people involved in carrying out very serious responsibilities on behalf of the country, like the president. But it is a pretty profound implication of my story, and it's true, and I think we have to do a lot of soul-searching and maybe even hold a national debate as a society. What are we going to do now about the presidency, now that we know that the presidents, in fact, have been given prior knowledge of their destinies as president? It's an incredibly complicated thing to resolve politically and philosophically.
Absolutely. Okay, to the phones we go. This hour will go by very quickly. East of the Rockies, Boston, Mass. we go. Hello, Lori. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Nice to speak with you and your guest. I have a question about the holographic film that your guest viewed on Jesus. And I know in another show it was mentioned that the police arrest report of Jesus was on the Internet, and they give descriptions when they arrest someone, and he was listed as 4'8" and a hunchback. And I just wanted to know if this is true, or did he look, more like what they depict in paintings of him and, things like that.
That's a fascinating question. The individual being crucified in the hologram, or actually it was a documentary, black and white documentary film of a hologram of somebody from that era being crucified. They had concluded it was Jesus of Nazareth, but of course there were something like 600 men of Jesus' time and age who in fact were executed in that way during the period when he was crucified. The individual in the film was very emaciated. He had black hair and a beard. He was essentially a European male with a sort of an aquiline nose and slightly droopy eyes, not unlike, in fact, Sylvester Stallone's. But he was in a great deal of anguish as a result of dying in that manner. The reason I do believe it was Jesus of Nazareth is a number of things that occurred during the film were right out of the gospel accounts of the crucifixion of Jesus, including the Roman centurion Longinus leaping up actually on 1 foot, because the individual being crucified was about 14 feet off the ground. And so Longinus took the end of his spear and actually speared the side of the individual being crucified. There were also women who were coming and praying at the foot of the cross. And so I'm not sharing this information to advocate a particular religious interpretation of the events, but the film I saw definitely closely followed the scriptural account of Jesus' crucifixion.
Okay, let's go to Springfield, Mass. First-time caller. Andy, go ahead. You're on with us.
Hi, I just have 3 questions for the guest.
3?
Well,
let's go one at a time.
Okay. You say that there's time travel, so does that mean that there's, time cops for, maybe rogue agents that decide that they're going to go off and do other things?
All right. That's question 1, Andy.
I have no knowledge of time cops, but I do know that in one of the seminars about teleportation, one of the reasons that the program gave for not introducing the technology socially was the concern that rogue elements, or in fact they mentioned organized criminal networks, would get hold of the technology and improve it, and in that way oppress society by, for example, committing crimes and then teleporting elsewhere to evade arrest. So certainly the issue of policing teleportation was within the contemplation of the program sponsors, but I don't remember the notion of time cops ever being articulated any further than that.
All right, number 2, Andy.
Was Gene Roddenberry the creator of Star Trek from the future? Or
I don't know. I think one thing I can add to the discussion of science fiction is that it's a literary genre that was partially developed by the U.S. intelligence community and military to take information from real clandestine projects and place them in fictional accounts so that the public would either be confused about the nature of things like new technical developments that were being kept secret, or if somebody who had been